Thank you, Jan and Jillian, for being with us on the Rising On podcast again.
Yeah, thanks for having us. So
Thank
excited
you.
to be here.
Yeah, so we are talking about something a little bit different today, and it all relates. We are talking about boundaries.
Yes, we are. So co-parenting boundaries are very, very important when it comes to having healthy dynamics and keeping everything, conflict-free and transparency. So
Yeah, and I think it's one of the things that we can do that, right? We can only control what we can control. And so we can control our boundary setting and our following through with boundaries. When you think about people who struggle to set boundaries, maintain and hold boundaries and do the consequences for them, what are some commonalities you see within those people that struggle?
I think a lot of times people struggle with boundaries because either they grew up in a home where their voice was either silenced or that they learned to stay silent as a sort of a defense mechanism because they went through these traumatic experiences where their voice was either denied or abandoned, rejected, whatever it is. And so they have these wounds. And so now if they try to speak up, or even in adult relationships too, you could go through a really abusive adult relationship. And if your voice gets silenced or dismissed, it can be really hard to establish healthy boundaries or know what that even looks like in a healthy relationship, or where you're trying to exert them into a relationship that's been around for a long time and now you're trying to shift the dynamic to where it feels safe.
Yes, yes, that like I haven't had boundaries, but actually right now I'm doing my healing and I'm going to set them. That causes all sorts of problems and
Yeah.
struggles in that relationship. And so why have you all, like you are working kind of in this arena that I work in, different capacity, kind of helping people with mediation and parenting plans, and that process. What kind of led you to think like, no, we're going to focus on helping people with their boundaries?
I think boundaries have always just been our calling for some time. We went through our own personal experience growing up in a rural farm town, moving to a city of like 3 million, which was a huge culture shock for us. And so we were a little too trusting of individuals that we let into our life and didn't realize that maybe we didn't have quite the same alignment when it came to our value systems. And so that whole experience, and then also our professional experience as well, in terms of our training through mediation and our therapeutic background, we realized there wasn't a real solid method to set effective boundaries in a way that elevates the relationship itself. And so we came up with this method that not only are we speaking our voice, but we're also negotiating a solution in place, which is similar to mediation and conflict resolution, in order to each person's voice is heard. But then in order to have that boundary agreement have integrity within it, then we have to negotiate what that solution might look like for change of behavior.
Yeah, and you brought up a couple of things. One, my audience and all of my clients that I work with, one of their innate qualities, could be environmental too, right? But is that really wanting to give people the benefit of the doubt and to trust that because they are coming into relationships, into situations, just heart open, are coming at it from an ethical and a place of integrity. And so sometimes it's that huge shock that the other people around them are not coming at the situation with integrity and with ethics, that their
Yes.
value systems don't match. Is that something that you see pretty, I guess, frequently in this work that you do?
Yes, I would say often the value systems don't align, which is why they've gotten to where they are in their current situation. And so a lot of times we help them identify what those values are going to be for this new relationship dynamic in terms of co-parenting, because obviously if they try to operate from their personal value system with their co-parent, it can be very challenging. Even though we want them to use our value system, there's a reason why that value system clashes with the other person. So now we have to help them redefine what values are you going to honor in this co-parenting relationship so we can create alignment, especially if you know how this person operates too. So what do you think that they may be willing to value or collaborate on to help create that synergy and create mutual agreements to benefit the children?
And when we operate from our value system, we're getting out of that emotional state or the reactive state, because values are a very logical way of responding to situations where if there's heightened emotion, we're just going to usually go in circles and we're not going to get to resolving the problem.
Yeah, and values work is so extremely important because that's what's almost like stripped from you is your ability to live autonomously, like through your value system when you've been in an abusive relationship. So your values don't actually matter when you're with your abuser. They don't care.
Yes.
Right? They don't care about your value system now. It was super helpful for them to hook you to know your value system. But then those are just not even helpful for them keeping you stuck in this abusive relationship. So yes, I think redefining or even shifting, what do you value is so helpful. How do you, I guess, help people start to see that, especially if, right, like I talk all the time, it's just an example. They don't even know what food they like. They don't know what they like on their pizza because that's been dictated for them. And so sometimes they are so out of touch with what they value. How do you help people get back to that?
So we'll help them think about some situations or instances that where they felt powerless or felt voiceless, and then think about in that situation what value needed to be honored that would help you meet the emotional need that would be the opposite of what you're experiencing in that situation. So if you felt triggered because there was a lack of transparency or communication, then more than likely you're going to value one of those, which will help you identify your value system. So we can look at uncomfortable or unfavorable situations or conversations, and that can help us lead to our value system and create that alignment that we're striving towards.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's tricky. It's if you don't know what you value, it's really hard to set comfortable boundaries. So many mostly women that I work with will come at this and they'll be setting a boundary and it makes them feel so mean. They just feel mean. Um, and so if you don't kind of have that sense of self-worth, or you don't really know your value system and you're kind of just like shooting from the hip, wow, it makes setting boundaries and sticking to them so difficult.
Yes, it can. So one of the biggest things that is very helpful for somebody coming out of a traumatic relationship is to create daily alignment to their top 5 values on a daily basis. Because when we have integrity with our own actions on a daily basis in regards to our value system, that starts to reshape our inner voice and our authentic truth in order to operate from that. And so we are rebuilding our self-esteem or inner voice from the inside out, more or less.
Yeah. So what is it called when you like ruin a movie because you said the ending? Whatever that's called, there's like a word for that. And I can't think of it. My brain is not functioning, but that's what we're going to do. So Jan and Jillian have a book. So they're not going to share every single detail of how they do this because we want you to go do this, because what they're talking about right now is putting things into action. So I'm wondering if you could share a little piece of what that looks like, that daily action, because that is necessary. It's similar to, when we're talking about like nervous system regulation. It's not just enough to, in the moment when the tiger is chasing you, to be like, oh, remember my nervous system. Remember all those things that Sybil said, but we didn't practice. It's a daily practice. So what's one way that they can do kind of a daily practice?
So in regards to having a daily practice, you try to identify your 5 values and then create 3 action plans around those 3 out of your 5 values. So for instance, if I say that, I really value, communication, I'm just going to use that one, value communication. Here we are having a conversation, authentic, and I'm saying, I showed up in a way that I was communicating that was effectively, assertively, and also genuine. And so that shows that I'm in alignment with my truth in who I am. But then also sometimes we need to create personal boundaries for ourselves, especially before we set them with other people. So having a self-care and self-love routine can be a great way to start in implementing some of those personal boundaries. So what are you going to do for yourself on a day-to-day basis to show you're committed and consistent to your inner truth and alignment?
Or you might also, as I say, some other value examples in creating your alignment to your truth. If you value honesty, then you might let somebody know your honest opinion about something if they said something that was offensive or hurtful to you. And so you would just keep kind of like a journal and write down daily those actions you took each day that align to those specific values that you are trying to create integrity with.
Yeah. And some of the values, like I would say number one value of my audience is usually like safety for their family, safety for their babies.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we're thinking about that, there's some really hard boundaries that you will have to put in place to meet that number one top value. And so I think that's something that I've shared of like, hey, so you're not mean, because what is it, right? This request that you're, requesting via your co-parenting app or whatever it might be, or your attorney, or is actually really focused on what is in your kiddo's best interest and their safety. And so I think, right, like giving them that little reframe of these boundaries are hard, but guess what? This is more important than the hard.
Yeah, I think so too. One question we had to ask ourselves is like, how can I help myself? Especially if I want these professionals to help me, I first also need to be able to help myself. And how can I advocate for safety in my own life so that way I can be supported by my attorney or therapist or coach, whoever I'm working with as well. But trying to create that synergy and alignment by just speaking up, knowing that there's not guilt or shame or fear around it, because what happens if we don't speak up, then things could get worse. So if we think about, I can advocate and speak, I have control over that. And that can help create safety too, knowing that our voice can be powerful for transformation.
I think it's also really important to identify what does safety look like to you, because safety can look very different to one parent versus like the other parent. And so one parent might value safety in regards to booster seats until a certain age or a certain height or weight for their children. The kids aren't allowed to stay at home until they're a certain age, or they're not allowed to have phone, and we need parental controls on those. So it all depends on like what safety provisions we're putting into place, but really identifying what it looks like to have safety, and then that way your actions can align to those specific safety measures that are that you value.
Yeah, and I was thinking not even just your co-parent, but let's think of all the professionals that you will come into contact with in this space. There's attorneys, there's evaluators, there's the judge, there's child protection, maybe there's like a child advocate or GAL. I mean, like there's all these professionals and their ideas on safety, and like your therapist, my ideas on safety are 100% different, guaranteed, than your judge or your evaluator. Right?
Yeah.
So that's so important. Right?
Oh,
like,
yeah.
Oh my goodness. Yep. What I deem as safe is not meeting like the minimum lowest standard.
Right. And so a lot of times I think other parties involved in these types of situations, other professionals, can see safety as, they can even see it as overstepping potentially, or even trying to infringe on somebody else's way of like living. And they're getting out of that child-centered framework in regards to what is beneficial to the children to create that safety, or what type of provisions you need for your own safety, such as they're not allowed, this person's not allowed in your house, or you only communicate by email or an app. You don't communicate by text message. So you're creating that sense of safety for yourself, so you don't feel, emotionally dysregulated every time a message pops up on your phone.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is an every time, right? Like ding, everyone's heart is in their throat when they get that notification, it feels like. Yeah. And I think that something that you've alluded to And I really want you to speak to it because I think you come at things from a different perspective because you have a different training than a lot of coaches and even therapists that talk about boundaries. Is there is this element of negotiation that you all are trained in doing, and it feels really scary, daunting, outside of the realm of kind of the innate ways in which a lot of survivors work, but oh my gosh, can be so helpful in these situations.
So I think when it comes to like abuse, or if you're in harm's way, if somebody's physically threatening you or verbally threatening you, then yes, safety becomes your priority in that top moment. And we may not be negotiating. We may just be removing ourselves to protect ourselves out of this dangerous type of environment. If people are having a calm conversation or they're able to get to a calm place, then we would negotiate solutions once both parties are able to listen to each other.
And I think too, with our method, we're approaching it from a constructive place. How can we work better together? Or how can we, honor safety so that way we both can navigate and feel, comfortable in this new relationship dynamic as we support our children, our child. So the way that we're setting, we're not telling people what to do, we're asking them to work with us, which can allow us also to feel more confident when it comes to setting a healthy boundary, because we're making a request and we're asking to get their input. When you get someone else's input, they're more inclined to work with us, which allows that negotiation process to be much easier. But if you dictate and tell someone what to do and they don't have input, they're immediately going to shut down or come at you full throttle and with all their threats and whatever, because they feel voiceless. And so the more each party has a voice and can articulate and negotiate, the better off you're going to reach mutual agreements that align in the best needs of the child.
Yeah. And I think so many of my listeners are like, well, they will never negotiate. And again, we can't control their lack of negotiating with us, but we can show up in that manner of negotiating or collaborating. And oh my gosh, you will look different if, right? So I'm always like, hey, you're going to write your emails or your messages in your co-parenting app as if the judge is reading every single one. Every single one.
Yes.
Right. And so if you're coming at things from this, like, hey, I'd really like to know your thoughts, or wow, that is such a huge concern that you've addressed. Can you please give me specific examples so that we can work together on this? Okay. So you just sent a lovely message, and it's not up to us how they respond.
So yeah,
Correct, yeah.
sometimes they do struggle. Being a high conflict personality type will struggle with being solution oriented. So sometimes it's better for the person who's more regulated or healthier person to communicate and give options. Like, what are your thoughts about this option or this? Does either one work for you, or do you have another solution that we can put into place? And sometimes the high conflict person, they will agree to a solution if there's different options presented to them. It's because they do have that
The need to win.
They feel like they're in control if they are choosing the option. Now, where the struggle might happen is the integrity with that boundary that is set, because they struggle with integrity themselves. And a lot of people will say, oh, I value accountability or responsibility. Usually that doesn't go over well with a high conflict personality.
Nope.
But integrity, for some reason, taps into their ego a little bit more. And so that's why I usually recommend operating from a place of integrity when it comes to communicating if we've got off track from the boundary that was set.
Yeah, I think so many survivors, they feel like they're doing the thing and it just feels like a losing battle because they're not getting what they're hoping from the other person, and yet there's still benefit to you interacting in a way that aligns with your values.
Correct.
I also think the biggest thing is not having expectations when it comes to setting these boundaries and always hoping for this, positive or constructive outcome, but be open-minded. So even if they come back with a response that doesn't feel good or seems unfavorable, and this is where you are going to break down their thought process by asking an open-ended question. Say, can you share more about your perspective on that? Or help me understand where you're coming from. And so that's helping you pause and not react, but respond. But then also make sure we always position it from a child-centered perspective. So think as if you're speaking for the child, not yourself. That way we're not getting in a power struggle with them when they do come at us with one of their crazy antics that they love to throw, into the
Yeah.
conversation. So
Yeah. And it's something I talk a lot about is like showing the contrast of, these, I mean, how many years are these cases? Forever, right? Like some of these are like 6, 7, 8 year long.
yes.
Just it feels like a battle. And you're deemed high conflict too, a lot of times within the court system. And so if you are responding in these ways, and I love that you said to use different responses to slow things down, because that is so important, to just give you a pause, slow it down, so that then you can regulate and actually come at things from that more value-based place, instead of your nervous system thinking like you're in fight or flight, like in this very moment. But responding this way, if you are really responding as a good co-parent, and then your ex-partner is responding like a crazy person, there is no better way, if you have the pleasure of going back to court some more, of showing like, look, I am doing my darndest to do the thing, to co-parent well. It is not working. And so if you're coming at it from that really reactive perspective, you do still look high conflict, even though there was, it's abuse one way. But if you can come this way, it will help in this manner.
Well, and the high conflict really great at manipulating a lot of the legal support and counsel and trying to paint themselves as the victim. So yeah, if you do use any kind of like high conflict or emotion, they can easily flip the script on you. So that's why it's so important to pause and think about, what is the best way to say this, and how can I best support my children or advocate for my child when I'm sending this message. That way they, the judge or attorneys can see, okay, they're actually just trying to resolve this problem for their child. It's not old marital wounds or discord showing up in the co-parenting relationship, which is where they'll chalk it off as like both people are high conflict. But they'll see like, okay, they're just trying to get solutions or answers here to resolve the conflict so they can move forward. They're actually not provoking the high conflict person.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was thinking of so many of my clients, audience, community members really love some canned language that they can just like boop and put in that message. And so some things we talked about is like, help me understand your perspective and how this is in our child's best interest.
Yep.
Right? Like, so yep, y'all are going to be therapists. Help me understand. Help me understand. That is language we use all the time. But yeah, like, I don't understand your perspective on this extracurricular activity. Help me understand how that's in our child's best interest. Great. You might get ghosted, or they might word salad you, which whatever, or they may share their points, right? So we don't know. We have no idea. We can guess, we can predict, but then it really is, you're not the right, because you're the controlling one and you're doing this and that and the other, but you're really asking. And then it's their choice to respond in an appropriate manner or not.
Right. And that's the thing is discovery questions are so powerful to gain insight into the other person's perspective. But really, it's an indirect way of trying to guide the conversation also to a resolution. And so we're putting it back on the high conflict co-parent as well to take accountability or responsibility for their perspective in terms of them, if they are trying to make a unilateral decision or make a decision that's not in the best interest of the child. So by asking these open-ended questions, it forces them to own up to what it is that their perspective is or why they're making this decision. If they do respond, now, yes, they can stonewall and choose not to, but the whole point is to, instead of making an accusation at them, like saying like, you're not putting the child's best interest forward, like, why are you doing that? We're not going to get a positive response whatsoever to that sort of statement. So positioning our discovery questions can really be to our benefit to gain the answers that we need.
I also think it's important to use I statements and not you statements when you're conversing with these people, because the minute you say you did XYZ or you're not doing this, that's just going to create greater conflict. And then obviously we're not going to be able to get farther, because it's going to open a whole can of worms, and then they're going down the rabbit hole, and then they bring up all these issues, which
usually they deflect and just point the finger back at you.
Yeah, which can make somebody feel really unsafe or uncomfortable, because then they feel like they're going back to this old pattern. So it is really important that we use, like she said, discovery questions and I statements when we are messaging with someone who's high conflict, so that way we can be preventative but also proactive.
Yeah. Yep. And again, like all of those pieces, feeling really prepared. I talk about the 4 Ps. It's like being prepared, proactive, predicting, and presentation. And so that is all what you all are talking about right now, is right. Like we can predict how they will respond. So we can write our request or our answer accordingly. So, right. And feeling really prepared. That can be like regulation. That can be looking at, I'm kind of jumping all over in this moment in my brain, but like if you have little sticky notes on your computer or by your desk, wherever it is, of like, these are my top 5 values, you can really prepare by even just like peeking at those and be like, oh, that response, nope, delete, 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 delete. That did not fit my value system. And then, yeah, how are you presenting this information? Right? It is really important. That presentation is so important. So
Yeah,
important.
the big picture perspective is very important in a high conflict dynamic. Rather than getting in that me versus you mindset, we want to it's like, it doesn't seem like we're on the same page here, or it seems like maybe we've got off track and getting them back on track in regards to what's important. And that is probably one of the top way of getting them out of that defensive mechanism that they have in the high conflict personality, is coming from a big picture perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was saying, as we move to like the really focusing on like that values and boundaries piece, we've recently in the community started talking about like playing the game, and how playing the game doesn't feel good to so many of our survivors. And so even like even I call it speckled rock, some people call it yellow rock, right? But it's like adding the little pleasantries into your message, like, thank you for your response, blah, 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 blah. And that feels so gross to so many. How do you help people, like, I guess, balance that piece of like, yes, you need to hold boundaries and you need to present this way for that big picture. And how do we prevent? I talk a lot about moral injury when we're like acting in ways that go completely against our value system. So have you, I guess, kind of worked with people in that position where they're like, ew, like even asking the email like that, I want to just like double middle finger it up because they're a-holes and they have treated me horribly and they abuse our children and blah, 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 all these things. And we're like, thank you for that response. Like,
So
how do you help people manage those pieces?
So our truth and who we are and our character has to be stronger, and our integrity with ourselves has to be stronger than their negative toxicity that they're throwing at us. So when we're aligned to our values and truth, we're not letting their negativity change the way that is that we feel about ourselves and how we are going to operate. And like you said, saying thank you for sharing your perspective. A lot of times I think people get sidetracked and they think that they're agreeing with them, but really we're just validating the response. And even though people don't want to see it this way, the high conflict personality is operating from childhood wounds where they never felt validated. So sometimes if you just let them know that they're heard, because every human wants to be heard and understood, sometimes that little snippet can make such a huge difference in terms of getting that resolution that you're looking for as well.
I also think too, think as if you're talking with like a business colleague or a coworker, someone that you're just showing respectful, amicable communication, as if like, whether you work for yourself, you're with a client or your boss might see this. Like it just goes back to showing like business etiquette in a way, because you have to think now you're in the business of raising children together. So think as if like it's no longer about you or them, it's about the child. So you have to figure out, how am I going to speak in a way that advocates for the child and take myself out of the equation? Like I always tell people, remove the word me from their context, because then you're making it about yourself, and then that also will fuel the fire. So if you're using the child's name, or if you're, like I said, going back to the discovery questions I statements, then they're less likely to be I don't know what the word to say. They're less likely to use gaslighting or projecting, because they're more likely to see that you're trying just to stay outside of it, but only advocate for the child. It's not, you're trying to get rid of the power struggle, more or less.
Yeah. And I think for those of you that this is like one of the hardest pieces of this work, because you have been harmed by this person. And guess what? It's in their world, it's still about you and harming you. And so being able to, on your side, try to remove that. It's not about them. It's like, protect my children. And when I'm talking to you all out there, all my, all my clients, community members, audience, you all say those things to me, right? It's like, no, my win is safety for my kids. My win is a healthy relationship with my kids. Their win is different. And again, we have no control over their win. But if you can focus on your win and what that even looks like, and a lot of my audience hates the term win, like they don't even like that word, but yeah, that bigger picture. And oh my goodness, pulling out some like old school stuff in dialectical behavior therapy. Everyone was trained in that. Don't do it a whole lot, but there's something called interpersonal effectiveness. And when I'm explaining to like teens this world, this is kind of what we're talking about. Of you shared your need or your want in a way that you feel good about, no matter the response. Like
Yep.
that's interpersonal effectiveness. In DBT, that's like your Cliff's Notes version. And so that's what we're talking about, is you're putting your perspective out there in a way that you feel good about, no matter the outcome. Because then at the end of the day, you will have less of that moral injury and less of those beating yourself up and shame piling up on your shoulders. So that's what Jan and Jillian and I are talking about really right now.
Well, yeah, and I think too, when you use your inner voice, you gain inner peace for yourself. Like you find forgiveness and set yourself emotionally free. Because we know that their behaviors and the way that they were abusive, nobody would condone that. But at the same time, this is about taking back your power and owning your truth. Because no matter what you say or do, they're probably always going to try to like push your buttons or get to your weaknesses or strengths. They have their cycles. One minute they're collaborative, the next minute they're trying to take you down the rabbit hole. So, they're up and down. And so when you know that, it's better just to stay aligned and not allow them to take you off of your own pathway, because you want to have that connection with yourself, which continues to have the connection with your child. But remember that they're usually often disconnected and they want to throw you for a loop whenever they're going through their highs and lows.
Yeah. Yeah. And so finding those ways to stay grounded within who you are. And right, that's like the work of healing. Somebody asked me the other day, like, what is narcissistic abuse recovery? And I was like, well, how long do you have? But right, like, oh my gosh, but Cliff's Note version, right? Cliff Notes version is that you are redefining who you are and living an autonomous life. Right. And so that's the goal. But yeah, it was funny. I don't actually use that language of narcissistic abuse recovery, but someone asked and I was like, oh man, in a nutshell, here it is. Because otherwise we're going to be chatting for hours. So I do want to share, Jan and Jillian have a book. Was it just what I was like, when is this today? Was it just released?
Yes, it was just released. Yep.
So tell us a little bit more about that.
Yep, our book is called Boundary Badass. It's a powerful method for elevating your value and relationships. And so that's why we're all about elevating our own inner truth, our own inner value, and expressing ourselves in a way that we honor who we are, but we're also trying to elevate our relationships as well in our lives.
Yeah. And so who is like the best person? Like when you all were writing it and you were like visualizing like the person that was picking up right there at like Barnes Noble or wherever they are, I don't know. And they pick up this book. Who is that person?
I would say it's the person who always tends to put themselves last and they're always putting other people before them. So, really helping people see that they're just as valuable or they can add value to connections or their own life and not feel like they have to stay silent, or that if they say something and you don't have to second guess yourself because if you believe in it, that's all that matters. And knowing that, like, the more you believe in your truth, it's going to be much easier to navigate, conflict in a confident way, but knowing it can be done in a very calm and constructive way too. It doesn't have to be so ugly. But you can use this in every type of one of your relationships across the board. And so the relationship with ourself is going to set the tone for a lot of other of our relationships. So looking inward and knowing that we can align and we can heal if we put our mind and body to it.
Yeah. So if you're out there, I was going to say, like, hi, everyone who's been gaslit their whole life, right? Like,
Yeah.
how many of you doubt your decisions? Yeah, everyone's raising their hands because that is your experiences have led you to that a lot of times, but that doesn't have to be the way, right? You don't have to doubt yourself. There is a way to start to, again, know yourself well enough to where you do believe in what you say and your decisions are valid.
Yeah, and we create this method to make it simple so that way, and you can speak from a place of value versus emotion. So then it is easier to be vulnerable without also exposing all of your shortcomings or things that make you feel uneasy when it does come to speaking up. So this method, it allows you to be assertive and confident, but also make requests without showing too much of your emotional side where it might be uncomfortable to express what it is or ask for what you want or need. Because growing up, if your voice was silenced or you didn't receive what it is that you needed, it can be much harder to advocate that way. So if we do it from a place of value versus emotion, the other person is more likely going to respond in a more positive way because values are universally understood, where emotions are often one-sided and not other people may not understand your emotional experience. So this allows us to communicate in a way to create constructive conversations and connect.
Yeah. Yeah. And emotions have, for a lot of my clients, especially, have actually been really dangerous to show.
Mm-hmm.
Did you show anger? Nope, because you got hurt for it. Did you show sadness? Nope, because you got hurt for it. Did you show like the overwhelm and exasperation in court? Nope, because if you did, your children were removed from you.
Yeah, a lot of people who had to have the good girl or good boy mentality growing up, and they couldn't, they always had to be dressed a certain way. They could never step outside of whatever their parents had expected of them, or they had to play a certain sport, or they had to go to dance, whatever it is. They always had to do, and they never got to really identify who they were because they were always being told what to do or told who they had to be versus actually saying, no, I don't like this. I actually want to try this instead. That, would go against the grain. So we're breaking generational family cycles by learning to find that inner voice and truth and setting ourselves free.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that because there, right, generational trauma, there's generational abuse, there's, right, we are not, unfortunately or fortunately, depending on your history, we aren't coming from a blank slate when we're born, right? There
Right.
are
Yeah.
patterns that are passed down, and even genetically, right? Epigenetics, what genes are turned on and off is all based on this genetic history. Well, where can they find this book?
So they can find the book. It's on our website at divorcefamilymediations.com, and you can click there and you can purchase it through the websites there.
Perfect. So right, it's like one of those ones that all the links like from there happen.
Yes.
Perfect. Yeah, that's nice because then we don't have to put like this link and that link and this other
Yes.
link and this other link and this other link. Amazing. Well, do you all have any last minute, like, want to leave our audience with one tip as they are kind of in the healing process, like trying on boundary setting?
Well, I think this goes to having personal boundaries with yourself, because when you feel good about your personal boundaries, you'll start to see the benefit and reap the rewards in your own personal life, which is going to help you feel safe to speak up. So also probably start with people that are more likely going to be receptive.
People who are safe people, because
Yeah.
even safe people, we have to set boundaries with them because we all have different belief systems and different perspectives in terms of how we operate. So start with people who feel a little bit more safe to you in regards to setting those boundaries, and then it starts to become, it's like any new habit, it takes a little bit to get in our own rhythm and learning it, but once you do, then it just becomes a very natural process, just like riding a bike. If you takes a few tries, but eventually you're going to get it. So
Yeah. Well, thank you all so much for joining us again. And for those of you listening, all the information will be posted in the show notes below, and in the show notes and information on the Rising Beyond website. Thank you all, and we will catch you on the next episode of the Rising Beyond podcast.
thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you.